All right. I just wanted to respond to this YouTube channel called Exposing Ahlul Bidah. Let's look at some of the content there, and we'll see if we can respond to it. I've already watched it, so I know what I'm going to say, but let me show it to you guys. All right. So, how about I pause? I want to explain some things. Right. So, I do want to start off by saying that the guy in the video says that Imam Ahmed would have said this is the speech of the Jahmiyyah. But the problem is that this same statement is attributed to Ahmed ibn Hanbal. We find it in Al Khalaz Sunnah. He says uh, over here, without we affirm it without a limit and a boundary, right? Bila had wala ghaya. Um, and I can go on. Give me 1 second. It's important to know that Ibn Taymiyyah did. He never denied that statement by Ahmed ibn Hanbal. He never said, "Oh, this was not actually shouldn't be attributed to him." Right? He actually tries to explain it in his own way. He says that he denied the limit in some ways and affirmed it in a different one, and I'll try to explain that better. But he does quote it in his book, right? In Bayan Tablis Jahmiya Bila Had Wala Ghaya. He does explain that what it means, right, in the prior page, what he thinks that the limit means, and I think it's important to look at that. He says here the word had for everyone who spoke it meant two things, by which it intended the reality of the thing itself, and the other thing that was intended by the saying, indicative of what is distinguished by it, right? It's really hard to translate his words perfectly, but thus the descriptive limit and the predestinative limit, both of them are intended to mean, and this is what I think in the end, his conclusion is what the meaning of it to mean its concrete existence, right? And so he uses the word ayan here, which means concrete, and it could mean tangible or physical, right? You could look up the meaning. So Abu Abdullah said that he's on the throne without a limit, right? So he doesn't deny that Ahmed ibn Hanbal says that he's on a throne without a limit. And what he thinks it means is that he can't be defined by anyone. Um, yeah, let me try to. Yeah, so it's important, first of all, that this guy in the video that I just showed you said that Ahmed ibn Hanbal would have denied that entirely, but because he said that Tahawi said without a limit or ends, and the guy in the video says, "Oh, Imam Ahmed would have denied that. He would have said, no, that's the speech of the Jahmiyyah." But we find him using that speech, and Ibn Taymiyyah defends it, right? So he never says, "Oh, he never said that." So I don't think that's a valid argument. And in the end, his definition, Ibn Taymiyyah, of the concept of the had is the physical existence, right? So he really shouldn't be using that term to describe Allah. And he does use a lot of uh, he says a lot of stuff in in this book where he really tries to like make God measurable in a way, right? For example, he said, "As for the fact that a thing is not describable by addition or subtraction, nor by its non-existence while it is present, nor by a measure, then this is unreasonable," right? In the sense, he's saying that God is measurable, right? And you could read through a lot of this stuff. He says a lot of things, essentially giving God a physical existence. That's what I think You could read through all of it, and you'll have to think of it yourself. But you can, and I'll explain one of the issues with affirming the had. All right. So the typical argument from the Salafis is that when we deny the limits and the ends and all that stuff, we're following the Jahmiyyah. But notice that not only Ibn Taymiyyah, but this is actually true about Salafis in general, and you find it in the guy in the YouTube video, that they affirm the limits and ends, right? And they try to defend it and say this is what it means. We affirm that, right? It's important to note that that speech does originate with the Mujassima, right? And when you call somebody a Mujassima, you have to, in my opinion, understand it historically, right? What is the historical meaning of Mujassima? What it really means is that there was a sect that affirmed that God was a jism, a body, and they had a certain understanding of what that meant. And there were certain attributes that they ascribed to what a jism is, right? And so it's really not a body in the sense that you typically think, what is a body? It really means like material. And so you find an Abul Hasan al-Ashari, and he's really the main source of the sects of his time, Makalat al-Islamiyin. And the Salafis do accept that source, right? So he actually says, first of all, he says that they say he does not have a body, right? Nor is he limited, nor has any end, right? Um, So Hisham bin al-Hakam said God is limited, right? And that originates with him, right? And he does attribute measurement to God, which you can say. And even this stuff here, rises, sits, dwells. Keep that in mind. I'll revisit it later on, right? And so it's important to note that Hisham bin al-Hakam is the first person to really use these terms to attribute to Allah. So when you're doing that, you're following him. So even though they say, "Oh, this is the speech of Jahm," right? The stuff that the Ashari say. Well, the speech that you use is the speech of Hisham bin al-Hakam, right? He's like a Shia guy who's a Mujassima. Um, and actually, a lot of this actually originates in Aristotle, right? Limit. This is actually from Aristotle. So when you affirm the limit, well, you're the speech originates in his books, right? So you're kind of following him in that sense. We could keep going. One second. Even for example, well, let me find it for you. I do want to show this just to make sure, just to get out of the way. So this is from Abu Liyad. He's a major Salafi, and he debates this topic a lot. And he says that the first to say that Allah is a body is the Rafida Ahlul Kalam Mujassima, in particular Hisham bin al-Hakam, right? And he actually uses this source, right? The same book we just looked at, Makalat al-Islamiyin. And so, well, what I did was I said, look, let's look at that source. In that same source, you find that Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari attributes uh, Hisham bin al-Hakam, which I just showed you, with attributing Allah limits, right? And so you can see how him being the first to say Allah is a body, in my opinion, also leads to the conclusion that he's probably the first to say he has limits, right? Because these ideas come together. And it's even both in Aristotle, right? So when you then affirm that he has limits, then you're following him, right? And he's the first Mujassima. And the Salafis, it seems like they're willing to concede that he was the first, uh, that uh, that Hisham bin al-Hakam is the first to say that Allah is a body, right? And so I did mention this. Let's look at this for a second, okay? Give me 1 second. This is another important book. This is Al-Darimi, right? This is when he lived. He's kind of early. Very important creed book. Salafis always reference it. Now you find Ibn al-Qayyim, right? Jawziyah, the student of Ibn Taymiyyah, he wrote in a book of the Meaning of the Islamic Armies. And he actually said this. His two books, Al-Darimi, these are the books, are among the greatest books ever written about the Sunnah, right? And creed, essentially. With the companions and the followers, right, used to believe he should read these two books. Not only does Ibn al-Qayyim strongly recommend it, but we find Ibn Taymiyyah used to recommend these books in the extreme. He used to extol it greatly. And wallahi, if you read his books, you'll see the source of his ideas. He does quote it. It's not like he hides from the fact that he quotes it often, Bayan Tadlis al-Jahmiyyah. But you have to understand, this book is very unique among Sunni creed books. At Tahawi, who they criticize, denies the limits and ends and all that stuff, right? So Ad-Darima goes in the opposite direction where he affirms these concepts, right? And so we find it here, right? Um, Early in the book, God has no limit, no end, no nihaya, right? And so he argues against that, you know. But we keep going, and let me pause for a second. He says a few things, right? For example, he quotes Ibn al-Mubarak, who may or may, I don't know if he said this, but whoever claims that doesn't mean just because he said it doesn't mean that it has to be the creed that we all agree on, right? But whoever claims that God has no limit, he has rejected the Quran and claimed there is nothing because God is limited in his makan, right? So he attributes that to him. You can keep going. He does say a few things that are very anthropomorphic, right? For example, he could sit on it, right? So the Lord is exalted, right? He could sit on it, so what is left from it is only 4 fingers of space, and he stretched out his 4 fingers and has a creak when he rides on it, and he is weighty on it. I remember this hadith from the early Hanbali books, right? And some people say it's an anthropomorphic book because it attributes weight to him. Let's see what else is on there. You know, it has a very direct description of God's location, right? The top of the minaret is closer to God than its bottom, right? And this is the part I was talking about earlier. Here it is. Let's see. Because the living, the eternal, does what he wants, and he moves as he wants, right? He attributes this to Allah, yataharrak, which no hadith or Quran attributes this. Descends and rises if he wants. This is another thing. Contracts, expands, rises, and sits as he wants. Remember, this is what Hisham bin al-Hakam said. I showed you earlier. He was the one who said he rises and sits and all that stuff. So you see this guy agreeing with him on that, right? There it is. He moves, dwells, rises, and sits. This is actually me quoting what was in the Abu Hassan al-Ashari book, right? So you find the same sort of description of Allah from Hisham bin al-Hakam, the first Mujassima in history, right? And you find the same thing in a book that Ibn Taymiyyah greatly praised. So how can you complain when people call you Mujassima when your sect agrees with the first Mujassima and Ibn Taymiyyah, who you guys follow in Aqidah, praised greatly, extolled greatly. That's what Ibn al-Qayyim said. This book of Al-Darimi, which says the same things that's in the Mujassima Creed. I don't know. I mean, is there anything? I don't think I'm saying anything controversial here, right? Let's pause for a second. And this is from the Darimi book. This is probably the worst statement in the whole book, right? If you have no issues with this book, then you have to have an issue with this statement. I guarantee you Imam Malik would have been upset with this one. Imam Malik said, don't describe the istiwa and all that stuff. Let's look at what he said here. Um, and I actually think Ibn Taymiyyah actually quotes it, by the way, right? So Ibn Taymiyyah quotes it in his Bayan Talbisa Jahmiyyah, which shows you that maybe he agreed with it, right? Hold on, let me just charge. Okay. And if God has wished, he would have istiwa, settled on the back of a mosquito, so that she would have taken hold of him by his power and the kindness of his lordship. This is found in that book. I'm not sure how you can defend that, right? I guarantee you Imam Malik would have rejected, right? And this is Ibn Taymiyyah's quote of it, right? Just to show you that it's actually in there, right? And he talks about the size of the throne. How can you deny that his throne is greater than the 7 heavens and 7 earths, right? So he's kind of talking about that. He does go into other things. Let's see if this is an issue. So, look, another thing I want to talk about is I did mention this in a video recently, but this is a description of another sect that identified as Mujassima, right? The Karamiya. If you've already seen this video, I made it a few days ago, but whatever. I'll just quickly go over it. Ibn Karam said that God has a limit, he has a body, and an end under it in the direction for which it meets the throne, right? So let's pause. Right, and so Ibn Taymiyyah says the similar concept in his book, Bayan Tabligh Jamia, volume 3, page, it's in both of these, right? He said, and actually here he talks about Ahmed's words, right? This is important. because he believes Ahmed ibn Hanbal affirmed and denied the had. His explanation of that, Ibn Taymiyyah's explanation of that, is that he affirmed it in one way and negated it in a different, right? And so he says Ahmed's words in affirming the had in two different cases. For the position that he said is on the throne with a limit, meaning that what is adjacent to the throne from his essence is a limit that has a direction for him. And what Ahmed said he is on the throne without a limit, he meant except for the angle adjacent to the throne, which is above, beyond. This is exactly what the is found in the Karamiyya, right? And you see the problem here. First of all, it's funny how this video said the guy in the video that I just was responding to. It's funny how the video was, oh, Imam Ahmed would have rejected tahawis saying that without a limit. But here we have Ibn Taymiyyah explaining this. This is the quote I was looking for actually earlier. But the point is that he's saying Ahmed denied the limit in some directions, but affirmed it in other. Right? Um, what is adjacent to the essence of Allah is a limit and a destination. Right? And so you can see how this agrees with the Mujassima. That's just the bottom line, right? Whether Ahmed ibn Hanbal agreed with it, we don't know exactly what, because he affirms it in some statements and denies it in others. Al Khalal, who's the foremost authority on collecting the statements of Ahmed ibn Hanbal, he collects the statement which denies it, right? There's nothing in Al Khalal, as far as I know, where he affirms the limit, right? Where Ahmed ibn Hanbal affirms in Al Khalal. Al Khalal is the first guy to really collect his statements. Now, give me a second here. Showed you guys this the other day, right? The next generation of Hanbalis, for example, Barbahari, he didn't write about the limit at all, right? That's another major creed book for the Salafis. He didn't mention it. Now, another guy, Ibn Battah, who the Salafis claim as one of their scholars, he actually says in his book, Ibn Battah, in, volume 7, page 326 of Al Ibana, he says he's overthrown without limit or measurement, right? And so a lot of the early Hanbalis said not to affirm the limit. The only reason that Salafis do affirm it, there's actually, and I mentioned this in my book, that there's a disagreement between the generations of Hanbalis, right? The first generation of Hanbali creed books, Harb al-Karmani and Abdullah ibn Ahmed, both have statements which affirm the had. The second generation, right, Al-Khalal, has only a statement which denies it, no statements which affirm it. This one doesn't mention it. Ibn Abbata has a statement which denies it. I just showed you. I believe he has a statement which affirms it. And it's always, there's a disagreement, right? And so the ones who affirm it seem to rely on these books. Now, according to Ashari scholar, Nuh Keller, and I'm sure others might agree with him, this is actually not a strong chain. So typically this book is rejected. I'm not sure about this one, right? So that's the confusion, I would say, with the Salafi movement, is that they try to rely on these books while also claiming these other scholars, and a lot of them don't agree on things, right? And they're trying to put everything together, right? And they do this with a lot of books. For example, Abu Hanifa. Let's pause for a second. This is important. When we say At-Tahwi denied the had, where does he get it from, right? Well, we do find in Abu Hanifa's book, Fiqh al-Akbar, he denies the measure, the limit, no, you know what I mean? He denies it, no measure and no limit. That's in Abu Hanifa, which, and he denies he's a body. He's one of the early Salaf, right? Whether he wrote that book, well, let's look 1 second. Give me 1 second here. All right, so because the Salafis will say, oh, he didn't write Fiqh al-Akbar. Well, according to Ibn Taymiyyah, he did, right? Majmu' Fatawa, volume 5, page 140. He says, in the book, the greater jurisprudence, right, which is the Fiqh al-Akbar, the well-known one on the authority of Abu Hanifa, right? And so he essentially, explains some aspects of the book that he agrees with. But you can see how that goes against them because there are parts of it that they don't agree with, right? For example, he says that, let's look at this part. I think this agrees with the Asharis here. He speaks not like our words, and he hears not like our hearing when we speak with instruments and letters, and God speaks without mechanism or letters, right? And I'm pretty sure Salafis don't agree with that, right? And that's it. I think, let's see what else is in here. And by the way, I mentioned this in another video. where Bin Baz and Salih al Fawzan wrote a commentary of Akida Tahawi, and they claim that maybe he didn't mean it when he wrote this book, the limits and ends part. That's what he's talking about in the video, I think, this scholar here. Yeah, so as I've showed you, this is not true, by the way. Right? He's saying that Ahl Sunnah are united in affirmation of the Had. Okay, yeah. Okay, I see. Yeah. So you could see the issue, which I did explain, that the terminology does originate from the Mujassima, right? So you don't just affirm terminology just because you think it agrees with you. And we did actually also show you that Ibn Taymiyyah explained that concept in a way that indicates that the meaning is a physical existence, right? And I showed you that ayan, the terminology he used, that had could mean the ayan, and he went on to describe that it means he believes that there is a boundary between him and the throne, but not in other directions, right? And I think that's different from what this scholar is saying, which is one of the problems with it, that everyone seems to explain it differently. So I do want to say that I did show you this in this video I made, that uh, Lumat al Itiqad does quote Al Khalal statement without limit or end, right? So he quotes it, whether he believes in that or not, it's there, right? Yeah. Well, I guess there's nothing else to refute it. I'll try to respond to other videos from this guy.